The house was quiet except for the soft clinking of silverware against a plate. Brian sat at the kitchen table, slowly working through his dinner, his fork scraping lazily across the porcelain. His eyes kept flicking toward his wife, who was pacing in the hallway with her phone pressed tight to her ear. Evelyn's voice was bright, animated, a low laugh spilling out every so often. She was so absorbed in the conversation that she had forgotten all about the meal she had set on the table. Brian set his fork down with a muted thud and leaned back in his chair. He could hear bits and pieces of her words, though not enough to string together the full picture. But her tone, light, excited, almost childlike, told him more than enough. By the time she ended the call, her face was glowing as if someone had lit a candle behind her eyes. "Guess what?" she said, slipping back into the kitchen. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement. "Mom and Dad invited us to their place for New Year's. Dad even froze the pond out back for skating, and they're planning fireworks. It's going to be wonderful." Brian's brow furrowed. He dabbed at his mouth with a napkin before replying. "Evelyn, you know how this works. Mom and Amanda are coming here. They always come here. That's our tradition." The warmth in her smile faltered. "Brian, it's been 10 years. 10 years of the exact same thing. Your mom and sister show up, the kids run wild, and I'm stuck in the kitchen for 3 straight days. That's not a tradition, it's a prison sentence." His tone softened at first, as if he thought reasoning with her would fix it. "Come on, Evie. It's family. They expect to be here. We've always hosted. That's what we do." She shook her head, her voice rising just slightly. "No, that's what I do. You think I don't notice? Every year I spend New Year's Eve with my hands in a sink of dirty dishes while everyone else drinks and laughs in the living room. I'm tired, Brian. I can't keep doing this." He sighed, reaching across the table to take her hand, but she pulled back before he could touch her. "You're exaggerating," he said, his patience thinning. "We have good times. The kids enjoy themselves. It's not that bad." Her laugh was sharp, humorless. "Not that bad? Do you even hear yourself? I'm telling you, I feel like a servant in my own house, and you call it tradition." His expression hardened, the crease between his brows deepening. "Tradition matters. Mom counts on this. Amanda counts on this. It's how we keep family together." "By breaking me apart," she shot back. "Do you realize how drained I feel every holiday? And you just keep saying, that's how it's always been. Well, maybe it's time for something new." The silence that followed was heavy, pressing against the walls of the room. Brian stabbed at a piece of meat on his plate, as if the act could punctuate the end of the conversation. "We're not changing it," he muttered. "They're coming here like always." Evelyn folded her arms, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her shoulders slumped, but her eyes carried a glint of something he didn't notice. It wasn't anger, not anymore. It was resolve. "Fine," she said quietly. "Then you enjoy your tradition." Brian looked up, startled by the cold edge in her tone, but before he could respond, she was already moving toward the sink, rinsing her plate with deliberate calm. To him, it seemed like the argument had ended, but behind the veil of her composure, Evelyn's mind was already racing ahead, shaping a different holiday than the one he imagined. And for the first time in years, she wasn't planning to host anyone. Upstairs, the faint hum of a television drifted from Noah's room. Evelyn paused at his doorway, leaning against the frame as she watched her 9-year-old son sprawled across the carpet with his Lego set. The glow from the screen lit up his earnest little face, and for a moment she simply studied him, wondering how someone so young had already grown used to carrying responsibilities he never asked for. She stepped inside and lowered herself to the floor beside him. "Hey, buddy," she said softly. "Can I tell you something?" Noah looked up, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "Sure, Mom." She hesitated, then let out a sigh. Grandpa froze the pond at their house. He even set up lights around it. "Grandma says they're planning fireworks for New Year's Eve." Doesn't that sound fun? His eyes widened instantly, a grin spreading across his face. That sounds awesome. Skating, fireworks, way better than sitting here while Aunt Amanda talks on the phone and I have to watch the twins. Evelyn's chest tightened. Every year it was the same. Amanda dropped her little boys into Noah's lap with a breezy, "Just keep an eye on them, honey," and disappeared into the living room. The twins were younger, restless, always fighting over toys or crying for attention. Noah, barely older than a babysitter himself, ended up stuck in a corner with them while the adults carried on with their evening. "You don't like that, do you?" she asked gently. He shook his head with conviction. "They're annoying, Mom. I want to have fun too. Why do we always have to stay here?" His question struck deeper than he realized. Evelyn swallowed hard, a mixture of guilt and exhaustion weighing heavy on her. "Because your dad says it's tradition," she whispered. Noah frowned, confusion clouding his eyes. "But traditions are supposed to be fun, right?" The simplicity of his logic pierced her more sharply than any argument she'd had with Brian. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead and kissed him there. "You're right. Traditions should be fun." Silence stretched between them for a moment before Noah's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "So, can't we just go to Grandma and Grandpa's this year? Just you and me." Evelyn blinked, startled. "You really want to?" "Yes." His excitement bubbled over. "I want to go to the farm, skate on the pond, light fireworks with Grandpa. Not sit here and be bored." Her laugh was quiet, tinged with relief. "You know, I was hoping you'd say that." They exchanged a look, half secret pact, half shared rebellion. Evelyn felt a rush of warmth at having her son on her side. For so long she had carried the burden alone, cooking and cleaning while everyone else celebrated. Now, with Noah's small but determined voice beside hers, she felt a spark of courage she hadn't allowed herself in years. That night, lying in bed, Evelyn stared at the ceiling while Brian snored softly beside her. Memories of past holidays paraded through her mind. Herself hunched over a roasting pan, scrubbing dishes while laughter drifted from the living room. The sting of hot water against her hands as the clock struck midnight. 10 years of the same, suffocating cycle. She had called it duty. She had told herself it was love, but really it was servitude. Her pulse quickened. She was done. Beside her, Brian shifted in his sleep, blissfully unaware. He assumed that, like every other year, her anger would cool, her resolve would weaken, and she would fall back into line. He had no idea that something inside her had shifted permanently. By the next afternoon, Evelyn had pulled out a suitcase. She folded Noah's sweaters with care, tucking in his favorite pair of gloves. He hovered nearby, his eyes dancing with anticipation. "Don't tell Dad yet," she whispered, pressing a finger to her lips. He mimicked the gesture, grinning. "Our secret." As the zipper slid shut, Evelyn felt a strange calm settle over her. For the first time in a decade, she wasn't dreading New Year's. She was planning an escape, one built not on rebellion for its own sake, but on the promise of joy for herself and for her son. And she intended to keep that promise no matter what. On the evening of December 30th, the grocery store was crowded with people pushing carts piled high with ham, pies, soda, and champagne. Brian maneuvered down the aisles with practiced efficiency, his phone in one hand, a crumpled list in the other. He glanced at the items, mentally picturing Evelyn at home in the kitchen, apron tied around her waist, prepping the endless dishes his family expected. It never occurred to him to ask if she actually had the energy or the desire to do it again. For Brian, it was routine as natural as breathing. By the time he pulled into the driveway, his trunk was full of bags. He grabbed as many as he could carry, balancing them awkwardly against his chest, and shouldered the front door open. "Evelyn," he called, his voice echoing through the quiet house. "Can you give me a hand with these?" Silence. Frowning, he dropped the bags onto the counter and walked through the rooms. The living room was dark, the kitchen spotless, the hallway eerily still. Upstairs, Noah's room was empty, bed neatly made. Evelyn's suitcase was gone from the closet. A chill slid down his spine. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number with shaky fingers. She answered on the second ring. "Brian!" Her voice came steady, calm, almost detached. "Where are you?" His tone was sharp with confusion and rising panic. "I just got home. What's going on?" There was a pause before she replied. "I told you, I'm not hosting this year. Noah and I are spending New Year's with my parents." For a moment, he couldn't breathe. "Evelyn, you can't just leave. Everyone's coming tomorrow. Mom, Amanda, the kids. We need you here." "You don't need me," she said evenly. "You need a servant, and I'm done playing that role." The line went quiet, and before he could find the words to argue, she ended the call. Brian stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, his mind racing. He dialed another number, his hands slick with sweat. "Mom," he said the moment Margaret picked up. "I need your help." Evelyn left. "You'll have to come early tomorrow so we can get everything ready." There was a stunned pause on the other end, followed by an incredulous laugh. "Excuse me? You think I'm going to cook and clean on my holiday? I'm coming to celebrate, not to work like some maid." "Mom, please," he urged. "Just this once." Her tone hardened, sharp as glass. "If Evelyn abandoned her duty, that's her shame. Don't you dare expect me to pick up her slack. I raised you, not her household. Figure it out yourself." The call ended with a sharp click, leaving Brian staring at his phone in disbelief. He tried Amanda next. She answered cheerfully at first, but when he explained, her mood soured instantly. "Wait, you want me to cook? You want me to handle all of that?" she scoffed. "Brian, I can barely keep my boys from destroying my own house. And besides, I don't want to be stuck in the kitchen. No one does." "But Amanda," no, her voice was final. "I'm not your solution. If Evelyn finally snapped, maybe you should think about why. Good luck, brother." The call disconnected, and Brian lowered the phone slowly, his heart pounding. For the first time in 10 years, he looked around his home and truly saw it. The spotless counters, the empty dining table, the silence where Evelyn's footsteps used to echo. He had always assumed her work was invisible because it was easy, because it was expected. But now, with no one to take her place, the reality struck him hard. Evelyn had been carrying all of it, year after year. She bore the weight of his family's comfort while they treated her labor as nothing more than background noise. And now that she was gone, the truth was unavoidable. Without her, the tradition collapsed. Snow crunched beneath Noah's boots as he darted across the wide front yard of his grandparents' home. The Harris farmhouse, with its white siding and wraparound porch, glowed warmly against the cold Tennessee evening. Strings of lights twinkled along the eaves, their reflection glittering on the frozen pond beyond the trees. "Careful, buddy, mister," Harris called, steadying the boy as he tried to balance a glass star in his small hands. "The top of the tree is a tall climb. We'll get it up there together." Noah laughed, his breath puffing in the frosty air. He craned his neck toward the towering spruce tree set in the front yard, already strung with colored bulbs that blinked like jewels. Evelyn stood a few feet away, her gloved hands tucked into her coat pockets, watching her son's face light up in a way she hadn't seen in years. Inside, Mrs. Harris busied herself in the kitchen, humming along to a Christmas record still spinning on the turntable. The counters were a gentle chaos, flour dusting the surface, pie crusts lined up to be filled, vegetables chopped and waiting in bowls. Unlike in Evelyn's own home, there was no sense of crushing pressure, no weight of expectation that it all fall on one person's shoulders. Mrs. Harris stirred a pot. Evelyn rolled dough beside her, and when Noah ran in from the cold asking for hot cocoa, Mr. Harris stepped in to whisk the milk on the stove. The work was shared, effortless in its rhythm. Laughter echoed from room to room, the kind of laughter Evelyn realized she hadn't heard in her house on New Year's Eve in over a decade. Here, no one was a servant. Everyone was family. Later that evening, headlights swept across the long driveway, breaking the stillness outside. Brian's car pulled in slowly, tires crunching against the snow. He sat behind the wheel for a long moment, staring at the glowing windows of the farmhouse, listening to the faint echo of music and voices carried on the wind. When he finally stepped out, the smell of wood smoke and roasted ham hit him like a wave. He walked up the porch steps, and before he could even knock, the door swung open. Noah bounded forward, throwing his arms around him. "Dad, come see the tree." Brian's chest tightened. His son's cheeks were red from the cold, his eyes bright with excitement. Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her expression calm but unreadable. She wasn't angry, not anymore. She looked almost free. "Brian," Mr. Harris said, clapping a firm hand on his shoulder. "Glad you made it. Come on in, warm up." Mrs. Harris appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "There's plenty of food. We're just finishing up." Her voice held no judgment, only welcome. Brian stepped inside, suddenly overwhelmed by the simple harmony of it all. The living room was alive with color, the tree shimmering with ornaments, the fireplace crackling, Noah proudly adjusting the star at the top while Mr. Harris steadied the ladder. Evelyn laughed softly at the sight, the sound cutting through Brian's unease. He sank into a chair, his hands restless on his knees, watching as his wife and son moved easily in the warmth of her family. They didn't look burdened. They didn't look tired. They looked happy. For the first time, he felt like an outsider at his own holiday. But no one treated him that way. Evelyn's parents included him in their toasts. Mrs. Harris passed him plates of steaming food, and even Evelyn set a glass of cider in front of him without a word. It was an effortless kindness that made his throat tighten. By the time everyone gathered at the long dining table, the spread was breathtaking. Roast ham glazed to perfection, sweet potato casserole crowned with toasted marshmallows, fresh-baked bread, and pies cooling by the window. Candles flickered against the frosted windows, casting a golden glow over the faces around him. Mr. Harris raised his glass, to family and to the new year. Glasses clinked, voices rose in harmony, and Brian lifted his own slowly. As he looked across the table, at Noah beaming, at Evelyn with her eyes bright in the candlelight, he realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't just eating dinner. He was seeing what a real celebration looked like. And the difference unsettled him more than he cared to admit. The next 3 days unfolded like a storybook. Each morning, Noah rushed outside before breakfast, his skates clutched under his arm, calling for his grandfather to meet him by the pond. The frozen surface shimmered under strings of lights that Mr. Harris had strung along the trees. Noah wobbled at first, but laughter carried him forward, Evelyn steadying him by the hands until his confidence grew. Soon he was gliding across the ice, cheeks flushed, his joy echoing across the frosty air. Brian stood at the edge, his hands buried in his coat pockets. He had never joined them before, never thought to step into the cold for anything beyond hauling groceries inside. Watching Evelyn spin gently with their son, her scarf trailing behind her, something knotted in his chest. She wasn't the tired woman bent over a sink, shoulders sagging under the weight of obligation. She was radiant, her laughter rising like music. Evenings brought bonfires and fireworks. Mr. Harris set logs ablaze in a stone fire pit while Mrs. Harris passed out mugs of steaming cocoa. Noah huddled close to his grandmother, wide-eyed as the first rocket hissed skyward and exploded into a burst of red and gold. He clapped his hands, cheering for the colors that showered down like stars. Evelyn leaned into her father's shoulder, smiling with a kind of peace Brian realized he hadn't given her in years. They walked together through the woods one afternoon, the snow crunching softly underfoot. Noah ran ahead, pointing at animal tracks, his voice carrying through the trees. Evelyn lingered behind with her mother, their conversation quiet, intimate. Brian followed at a distance, his breath clouding the air, realizing just how separate he felt from this circle of warmth. He wasn't excluded, not by them. They welcomed him at every turn, but he knew he had kept himself apart, assuming that tradition was enough to replace true togetherness. At night, after Noah had collapsed into bed, exhausted from skating and sledding, Brian lay awake beside Evelyn in the guest room. He could hear her steady breathing, see the faint glow of the moon outlining her face. For the first time, he allowed himself to wonder, had he mistaken duty for love? Had he mistaken habit for happiness? On the morning of January 2nd, the family gathered to pack away decorations. Laughter still filled the air as they boxed ornaments and brushed crumbs from the table. Noah hugged his grandparents tightly, promising to come back soon. Evelyn kissed her mother's cheek, gratitude shining in her eyes. When it was time to leave, Brian carried their bags to the car. The drive home stretched quiet, the hum of the tires filling the space between them. Noah had fallen asleep in the back seat, his head lolling against the window. For miles, Brian said nothing. Then, as the road curved past the last stretch of farmland, he reached across the console, his hand trembling slightly. "Thank you, Evelyn," he said, voice low. "And forgive me." She turned to him, her expression soft, almost surprised. There was no triumph in her eyes, no bitterness, only a quiet acknowledgement of the words she had waited years to hear. She gave him a small smile, the kind that carried both forgiveness and a reminder that he had a long way yet to go. The highway stretched ahead, gray and endless, but for the first time, Brian felt something shift. A weight he had ignored for too long was beginning to lift, replaced by the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they could start again. The house was still quiet when the phone rang. Evelyn was folding laundry in the living room, the hum of the dryer soft in the background. Brian picked up without checking the caller ID, pressing the phone to his ear. His mother's voice exploded down the line. "How dare you break our family tradition? Do you have any idea how humiliated I felt when Amanda and I showed up and found no one there? No food, no decorations, nothing." Brian winced, pulling the phone slightly away from his ear. Evelyn looked up from the laundry basket, her hands pausing mid-fold. She could hear every word, sharp and furious, cutting through the room like shards of glass. "Mom," Brian began cautiously, "we talked about this." "No." Margaret snapped. "We did not talk about this. You went along with that woman's selfish plan and ruined everything. Holidays are for family, and you let her destroy it. What kind of son abandons his own mother on New Year's Eve?" Evelyn lowered her gaze, choosing silence. Her heart pounded, but she would not give Margaret the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. She continued folding, steady, deliberate, while every nerve in her body tensed. For a moment, Brian stayed quiet, caught between habit and the new truth settling inside him. Then something shifted. "Enough, Mom." His voice was firm, carrying a weight it never had before. On the other end of the line, there was a stunned pause. "Excuse me," Margaret hissed. "You heard me," Brian said, standing straighter now. "Evelyn is not your servant. She is my wife, and she has the right to spend the holidays however she wants. We all do." Margaret's gasp crackled through the speaker. "Brian, how dare you speak to me like that? After everything I've done for you." "This isn't about what you've done for me," he interrupted, his tone sharper now. "It's about what you've expected from her. Year after year, you and Amanda walk in here, dump everything on her shoulders and call it tradition. That's not family. That's exploitation." From the kitchen doorway, Amanda's voice suddenly chimed in. She had joined the call on speaker at her mother's house. "Exploitation? Are you serious? She cooks, she cleans, big deal. That's what women are supposed to do at holidays. She could have handled it if she wasn't so dramatic." Evelyn stiffened, but remained silent, her face calm. Brian's jaw tightened. "No, Amanda. She couldn't handle it. And she shouldn't have to. Do you even hear yourselves? You show up to celebrate, and the only reason you enjoy it is because Evelyn is in the kitchen, breaking herself apart to keep everyone else comfortable. Not this year. Not ever again. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Margaret's voice trembled with outrage. So what are you saying, Brian? That we're not welcome anymore? He hesitated only for a heartbeat. Then he spoke with finality. I'm saying if you come into this house, you will respect my wife. You will treat her as family, not as hired help. If you can't do that, then no, you are not welcome. The line went dead silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. For once, Margaret had no retort. Finally, her voice returned, cold and brittle. You've changed. She's poisoned you against us. Brian shook his head slowly. No, Mom. I've finally opened my eyes. Amanda muttered something under her breath before the call abruptly disconnected. The silence afterward was deafening. Brian lowered the phone and looked toward Evelyn. She was standing very still, a folded towel clutched in her hands. Their eyes met, and for the first time in years, there was no barrier between them, only the fragile recognition that he had chosen her, publicly and without hesitation. Evelyn's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, one that carried both gratitude and disbelief. It wasn't a complete victory, not yet, but it was a beginning. And as Brian set the phone down on the counter, he knew the line had been drawn. His mother might never forgive him. His sister might resent him forever. But for once, he didn't care. He had finally defended the woman who had carried the weight of his family far too long. A year slipped by, carrying the weight of old traditions with it. When December rolled around again, the Bennett household no longer buzzed with the frantic preparations that had once defined Evelyn's holidays. There were no shopping lists taped to the fridge, no counter stacked with pans, no dread creeping into her chest. Instead, suitcases lined the hallway, packed with winter coats, boots, and thermoses for hot chocolate. This year, the Bennetts weren't hosting. They were heading to a mountain lodge with close friends, trading chaos for quiet trails and frozen lakes. On the morning of December 31st, Noah bounded down the stairs, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Are we leaving soon? He asked eagerly, eyes wide with anticipation. Evelyn smiled at his enthusiasm. He wasn't 9 years old trying to keep younger cousins entertained anymore. He was a boy who finally had the freedom to enjoy the holiday as it was meant to be. For him, New Year's meant skating, sledding, and watching fireworks without being saddled with responsibility that never should have been his. Brian zipped up his coat and loaded the bags into the car. He moved with an ease Evelyn had never seen during the holidays. No tension, no grumbling about schedules. Just a man ready to start something new. As they were about to leave, his phone rang. The name flashing across the screen made him pause. Margaret. He answered, his tone polite. Hey, Mom. Her voice came sharp, demanding. So, what's the plan for tonight? Amanda and I are coming over. We expect dinner to be ready when we arrive. Brian chuckled softly, a sound that startled even himself. There's no dinner here, Mom. We're leaving for the lodge. There was silence, then an incredulous gasp. What do you mean you're leaving? You can't just abandon us again. Maybe next year, Brian said lightly, shutting the trunk. But tonight we're busy. Evelyn, standing beside him, heard every word. For the first time, she saw her husband not as a reluctant bystander, but as a true partner. He wasn't just tolerating her choices. He was standing with her, shoulder to shoulder. Margaret's voice rose in protest, but Brian didn't flinch. We've made our decision. If you want to spend New Year's together, it will be on different terms. Evelyn is not your hostess, and this house isn't your kitchen. Either respect that or don't come. He ended the call before the argument could spiral further. Slipping the phone into his pocket, he turned to his wife with a wry smile. Ready. Evelyn exhaled slowly, a wave of relief washing over her. For years, she had fought this battle alone, her voice drowned out by the weight of tradition. Now, at last, she wasn't alone. The drive to the lodge was filled with laughter. Noah chattered about snowball fights and bonfires, planning every detail of the night ahead. Evelyn rested her hand on Brian's, her heart lighter than it had been in over a decade. By the time they reached the lodge, twilight was settling over the mountains. Friends greeted them at the entrance, the sound of children's laughter spilling across the snowy grounds. Noah darted off to join the others, his joy unburdened, his shoulders free of responsibility he never should have carried. As Evelyn and Brian stepped inside, warmth wrapped around them, the scent of pine and cocoa mingling in the air. For the first time in years, New Year's felt like what it was meant to be, a celebration, not a sentence. And for Evelyn, it wasn't just a holiday. It was proof that even the heaviest chains could be broken and new traditions could be born. The night sky above the mountains was a canvas of black, pierced by glittering stars and the glow of lanterns strung along the frozen lake. Friends huddled close around bonfires, their laughter carrying across the crisp air. Children darted over the ice, their voices rising with excitement as sparklers lit their small hands. Evelyn stood at the edge of the lake, her coat pulled tight around her shoulders. Brian was beside her, a thermos of cocoa in his hand, and Noah was racing across the ice with the other children, his laughter echoing like music. The crackle of fireworks began in the distance, low booms shaking the cold air before bursts of red, blue, and silver streaked across the sky. She tilted her head back, watching the colors fan out above her. For years, this night had been nothing but exhaustion. Her hands raw from scrubbing dishes, her body aching as she listened to laughter float from another room. The memory was so vivid she could almost smell the dish soap, feel the sting of water on her skin. But tonight, those years felt far away, as if they belonged to another life. A life she had finally walked away from. Brian glanced at her, his expression soft, reflective. He hadn't said much since they arrived, but he didn't need to. The way he stood close, the way he smiled when Noah's laughter rang out, it was enough. For the first time, Evelyn felt that they weren't just surviving the holiday. They were living it. Another firework exploded overhead, scattering gold against the dark. She caught its reflection in the ice, then in her own son's face as he skated past, cheeks flushed with joy. Her heart swelled at the sight. He wasn't burdened anymore. He wasn't a child pressed into babysitting while adults pretended not to notice. He was free, laughing, glowing, and utterly himself. Evelyn took a long breath, letting the cold air fill her lungs. In that moment, she understood something simple, yet profound. Traditions matter only when they bring joy. The moment they become chains, it's time to break them and build new ones. She turned to Brian, who was watching her quietly. Their eyes met, and for the first time, there was no shadow of resentment between them, just shared understanding. He reached for her hand, fingers wrapping around hers in a steady grip. The countdown began, friends calling out the seconds as the clock ticked toward midnight. Evelyn joined in, her voice rising with the others. 10, 9, 8. The numbers melted into laughter and anticipation, until the sky erupted in a thunderous display of fireworks. Noah shouted with delight, spinning on the ice as red and silver sparks showered overhead. His laughter carried across the lake, bright and unrestrained, a sound Evelyn wanted to hold onto forever. The light from the fireworks danced in her eyes, reflecting off the sheen of unshed tears. She felt no sadness, only release, the weight of the past lifting, replaced by something lighter, freer. Brian leaned closer, his voice barely audible above the noise. "Happy New Year." Evelyn squeezed his hand, her smile soft but certain. "Happy New Year." The booms echoed into the distance, fading into the stillness of the night. The crowd's cheers lingered, but for Evelyn, the moment belonged only to her small family. To Noah's laughter, to Brian's hand in hers, to the quiet promise that they had finally found their way forward. A new tradition had begun. Not one imposed, not one endured, but one chosen. And as the colors of the fireworks cascaded across the winter sky, Evelyn knew this was more than a holiday. It was a new beginning.
The world keeps turning, and with each turn comes a new story. When one door closes, another opens, leading us into a journey entirely different. Let us set aside the echoes of the tale just past and step together into a new realm where another destiny awaits to be told. And now I invite you to listen to the second story, a path of its own, unrelated to what came before, yet filled with mysteries and surprises meant only for those willing to journey onward with me.
It had been 5 years, but that morning, something pulled me into Daniel's room. Maybe it was the silence in the house, heavier than usual. Maybe it was the way the sun hit his door, just barely ajar. Or maybe it was because I had nothing left to lose. The room was exactly how he'd left it, bed unmade, school books still on the desk, posters curling at the edges. His backpack leaned against the dresser like he might walk in any minute and grab it. It smelled faintly of that teenage mix of body spray and detergent. I stood there, not daring to touch anything, just breathing it in like oxygen. I whispered, "I'm just going to tidy up a little, baby. Maybe throw away a few things you didn't need." The words caught in my throat. My hands trembled as I reached for the bookshelf, fingertips brushing over the dust-covered spines. I pulled out a few old notebooks and some dog-eared paperbacks. That's when something fluttered to the ground, a bright blue card, the kind kids give their moms on Mother's Day. I picked it up. The front was covered in glitter and crooked hearts. On the inside, in Daniel's sharp, slanted handwriting, it read, "Mom, I love you. Always." My knees gave out. I slid down to the floor, the card pressed against my chest. That old, raw pain burst open like it had just happened yesterday. The sob that escaped me didn't sound human. 5 years. 5 years without his voice, his laughter, his shoes by the door. 5 years of pretending I was surviving. But the truth was, I hadn't lived a single day since he left. Daniel had just turned 16. He was tall, beautiful, full of charm and kindness. Everyone adored him. He loved hiking, music, tinkering with old gadgets. There was so much life ahead of him. So many things I thought I'd get to see: his graduation, his first heartbreak, his wedding, grandchildren maybe. I was supposed to be there for all of it. But life doesn't ask permission before it shatters you. I glanced around the room again, imagining what it might have looked like if he'd lived. Maybe he would have gone off to college by now. Maybe the posters would have come down and a framed diploma would hang in their place. Maybe there'd be a suitcase in the corner instead of a dusty backpack. But the room was frozen. Time had stopped here, the same way it had in my chest. "You'll never get married," I whispered to the walls. "I'll never hear your voice grow deeper. I'll never have grandkids to spoil. You left, and time left with you." A cruel memory tugged me further under. The day he died. The last day we were together. He had been packing for a camping trip with his classmates, something organized by their outdoor club. It was supposed to be a week in the hills, supervised, planned, safe. I'd helped him pack, folding extra socks, stuffing a first aid kit into his bag like it would actually protect him. "Take the extras," I'd told him. "You'll thank me when your feet are dry." He laughed and rolled his eyes. "Mom, I'm not a rookie." Still, I remember the nervous flutter in my chest. Something didn't sit right, but I smiled and joked instead of speaking it out loud. "I'll miss you," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'll be fine, Mom. You worry too much." And that was the last thing he ever said to me in person. I exhaled long and slow, clutching the card like it was the last thread tying me to the earth. That day, I had no idea my world was about to end. I'd packed him trail mix and love, and he'd walked out the door full of dreams. I would never get that day back, and I would never get another one with him. He had been so excited for that camping trip. It wasn't the first one he'd gone on with the outdoor club, but it was the longest. 2 full weeks in the woods, with his classmates and their instructor. I remember thinking it was excessive. Why 2 weeks? Why not just a weekend? But Daniel had insisted. "Mom, it's going to be epic," he'd said, grinning as he shoved snacks into his bag. "We're doing this whole survival thing. No cell phones, no cabins, just tents and stars." I tried to smile. "Sounds intense. Just don't forget to bring your allergy meds." "Yes, Mom." "Geez, you act like I'm 5. I laughed, but the unease stayed. It sat in my gut like a stone. The night before he left, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, then got up to check his bag one more time while he was in the shower. I added another pair of socks, tucked in a little envelope with some extra cash, just in case. Moms always do that. Prepare for things we can't name. The morning he left, he gave me a quick hug and a distracted "love you" before bounding into the school bus. I stood on the sidewalk, waving even after the bus had turned the corner. Like if I waved long enough, he'd come back. That afternoon, I cleaned the house in silence, pausing in the doorway of his room. I didn't go in. I just stood there, listening to the quiet. The first week passed slowly. I busied myself with work, kept my phone close, waited for updates on the school website. Everything seemed fine. The instructor, Mr. Brennan, had checked in with the school staff, said the kids were doing well, weather was perfect, no issues. Then came the night. It was sometime around 3 a.m. I woke up suddenly, sitting bolt upright in bed. My heart was racing, as if someone had jolted me from the inside. I clutched at my chest, breath shallow, head spinning. "Daniel!" I called out before I even realized what I was doing. There was no answer. I tried to brush it off as a bad dream, some subconscious anxiety, but I couldn't sleep after that. I paced the house barefoot, checked the locks, made tea I didn't drink. I kept looking at the clock, at the phone, back at the clock again. At sunrise, I called his phone. It rang, and rang, and rang. Then the robotic voice, "The person you're trying to reach is unavailable," I called again, and again. Then I called Mr. Brennan's number. No answer. I called the school's emergency contact line. No one picked up. They weren't expected back for a few more days. Maybe they were out of service range. Maybe the phones were off. Still, I knew. I didn't want to know, but I knew. By noon, I was in full panic. I drove to the school, demanded someone do something. Finally, around 2 in the afternoon, the call came in. Daniel had drowned. That's what they told me. Just like that, a flat line over the phone. "Your son was found unresponsive in the lake early this morning." No context, no explanation, just a silence that followed me for years. I remember falling to my knees, the phone slipping from my hand. Someone helped me into a chair. I think it was the school nurse, maybe a secretary. I don't remember her name. I don't remember much of anything after that, except darkness and the sound of my own scream. The funeral was a blur. People cried and brought casseroles. My husband, Stephen, stood beside me but barely touched my hand. He was already slipping away. A week later, he exploded, screamed at me, "You're the one who encouraged him to go. You and your stupid idea of letting him be independent." I didn't argue. I let him blame me, because I blamed me too. I kept replaying every moment, every sentence. If I hadn't let him go, if I'd said no, if I'd trusted my gut. But that's the curse of being a mother. We think we're supposed to protect them from everything, even fate. Stephen left not long after, packed a bag and walked out. Said he couldn't look at me without thinking of Daniel. I didn't stop him. I stayed in that house, in that silence, with only one thing left that mattered, Daniel's room, and the memory of the boy who should have come home. After Stephen left, the house became a tomb. Not just because Daniel was gone, but because the last traces of life went with them. The laughter, the footsteps, the noise, even the creaks in the hallway seemed quieter, as if the house itself was mourning. At first, people came. Friends, neighbors, coworkers. They brought flowers and food. They sat on the couch and said all the things people think they're supposed to say, He was such a bright light. "You're so strong. Time will help." Time didn't help. It didn't soften anything. It just stretched the pain out into something I could wear like a second skin. People stopped coming. I don't blame them. Grief makes people uncomfortable. They want you to cry for a while, then dust yourself off and be okay again. They don't know what to do with you when your sadness doesn't end. And mine didn't. It settled in, deep and stubborn. I returned to work 2 months after the funeral. My boss had held my job for me, a clerical assistant at a small public office. I went in, wore the clothes I always wore, smiled just enough to not worry anyone. But I could feel it, the way people stiffened when I walked in, how conversations would suddenly shift or fall silent. Like my presence made things too heavy. I didn't blame them for that either. I was heavy. My eyes, my voice, my breath, they carried the weight of a boy who wasn't coming home. Eventually, I asked for a transfer. There was an opening in the dispatch room, buried in the back of the building. A small, windowless office where the phones rang and nobody asked you to make small talk. It paid less, but I didn't care. My supervisor hesitated. "You sure about this, Lillian? It's pretty isolating back there." I gave him a tired smile. "That's the point." So I took the job, sat in a little gray chair behind a little gray desk, and answered calls from people who didn't know me, didn't expect me to smile, didn't feel the need to mention Daniel. Every night after work, I came home to the same quiet house. I'd heat up something bland from the freezer, sometimes not even eat it, then drift down the hallway and into Daniel's room. That was the only place I felt, not okay exactly, but less fractured, less lost. I didn't talk to anyone anymore, not really. Just Daniel. I'd sit on the edge of his bed, like I used to when he was sick or had nightmares. I'd tell him about my day, about how the coffee machine still made that awful noise, how a caller had asked if Lillian from the front desk still worked there. I'd tell him I missed him, that I hated this life without him, that I didn't know what the point of any of it was. I wasn't crazy. I didn't hear voices or see shadows. I knew he wasn't really there, but pretending, just for a little while, made the unbearable slightly less so. That room became my sanctuary. Every surface stayed just as he left it. His notes still taped to the wall, his backpack untouched, his headphones still looped around the bedpost. I vacuumed carefully around them, dusted lightly, afraid to disturb the air. It's strange how pain can become a routine. Grief folded itself into my days, into the quiet rituals of survival. Wake up, go to work, come home, talk to a ghost. I didn't expect anything to change. I didn't want it to. Change meant movement. Movement meant leaving something behind. And I couldn't bear the thought of leaving Daniel, even symbolically. So I stayed still. And for a long time the world let me. The day they let me go was quiet. No drama. No long meeting or drawn-out apologies. Just a folded letter handed across a desk with a practiced smile and a corporate phrase. Due to restructuring, I nodded, took the envelope, walked out. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel much of anything. I drove home on autopilot, parked in the same spot I'd parked in for years, and sat there, engine ticking softly as it cooled. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the driveway. Inside, the silence greeted me like an old friend. That night, I couldn't sleep. Again, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hollow tick of the wall clock. My hands kept fidgeting under the blanket, restless like the thoughts swirling in my chest. And that's when I dreamed of him, Daniel. It wasn't like the other dreams, not the fleeting, blurred ones where he was a boy again, laughing in some memory. No, this was different. He didn't have a face. Not really. It was more of a presence, glowing softly in the corner of some unidentifiable room. But the voice, it was his voice. Older, calmer, deeper. "Mom, I'm still with you." My breath caught in the dream. I felt myself lean forward. "You don't have to hold on like this," he said gently. "Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean I'm gone." I wanted to scream, to argue, to say I couldn't, but I couldn't find my voice. "You're living in one moment," he whispered, "and that moment has already passed. It's okay to move. It's okay to live. For me." Then he was gone. I woke up crying, but not like the other times. This wasn't the kind of crying that hollowed me out. It was something else, like something had cracked open just enough to let a little air in. The room was still dark, the house still empty, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel crushed beneath it. I sat up, wiped my face, and whispered into the silence, "Okay, I'll try." Later that morning, I walked to my closet and reached for my usual outfit: black cardigan, black slacks, my uniform of grief. But then I paused. My hand hovered over a blouse I hadn't touched in years. It wasn't bright or cheerful, just a soft blue button-down I used to wear to church. I put it on. It felt strange, like putting on someone else's skin. But as I looked in the mirror, something in my reflection shifted. My shoulders weren't as slumped. My eyes, still tired, still grieving, but less empty. I didn't go back to Daniel's room that night. Not out of defiance or guilt. I just didn't need to. I sat at the kitchen table instead, read an old magazine, and finished a cup of tea while it was still warm. It wasn't healing. Not yet. But it was movement. A flicker of something I hadn't felt in 5 years. Hope, maybe. Or the memory of hope. I whispered into the quiet again before bed. "Thank you for coming to me." And even though no bird landed on the windowsill, no voice answered back, I felt the shift deep inside, like maybe Daniel wasn't the only one helping me come back to life. It was a gray morning, late October, the kind of day when the sky never quite wakes up and the air smells like wet leaves and cold stone. I hadn't planned to visit Daniel's grave that day, but something in me needed to go. Maybe because I hadn't been back since the dream. Maybe because I wanted to tell him I was trying. I don't know. I just went. I didn't bring flowers. Just a scarf wrapped tightly around my neck, my breath curling in the air as I walked through the cemetery gates. My boots made soft thuds on the damp path, and the wind moved lazily through the bare trees. I'd been there so many times I didn't need to look for the headstone. I could find it in my sleep. But as I turned the corner and approached that familiar stretch of ground, I stopped. Someone was already there. A small figure sat huddled at the foot of Daniel's grave, back pressed against the iron fence. At first, I thought it was a bag of leaves or some discarded blanket. But as I got closer, I saw it was a child. A boy, no older than 7. He didn't notice me at first. He just sat there, knees to his chest, soaked through with rain. His fingers were red from the cold, and his clothes were thin, far too thin for this weather. I approached carefully, trying not to startle him. "Hey, sweetheart," I said softly. "You okay?" The boy turned his head, just enough for me to see his face. Pale, tired, tear-streaked. "I'm fine," he said hoarsely. "Don't need anything." I knelt beside him, ignoring the cold that seeped into my jeans. "Are you here visiting someone?" He nodded once. "My mom and dad. They're buried here." My heart twisted. His eyes were so much older than they should have been. "I'm Lillian," I told him. "What's your name?" "Benji," he whispered. We sat in silence for a moment. Rain tapped lightly on the leaves above. My fingers ached from the cold, but I didn't move. "How long have you been out here, Benji?" He shrugged. "Since morning." "You came here by yourself?" He hesitated, then nodded. I didn't ask where he lived. I already knew. "Did someone hurt you?" I asked gently. "No," he said quickly. "Not like that. It's just the home is bad. The big kids, they make the little ones steal things. Smoke. Hit each other. I don't want to be like them. I don't want to be there." "Home," I echoed, though I knew he meant a group home. A shelter. He stared at the headstone, not Daniel's, but the one next to it. "I just wanted to see them," he said. "I don't think anyone else comes." The way he said it, flat, matter of fact, broke something inside me. Benji, I said quietly, you can't sit out here in the cold all day. You'll get sick. Doesn't matter, he muttered. Yes, it does, I said, firmer this time. It matters to me. He looked at me then, really looked, like he was trying to decide whether I meant it. My son is buried here, I added. His name was Daniel. He was 16. Benji blinked. That's old. I smiled just barely. It was too young. We sat in silence again. Then I held out my hand. Come on, let's get warm. There's a cafe just outside the gates. They have hot tea, maybe even cookies. He didn't move. You don't have to tell me everything, I said gently, but I don't want to leave you here alone. Finally, slowly, he took my hand. His fingers were ice. Mine weren't much warmer. We walked together through the cemetery, two shadows moving toward something neither of us understood yet. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what came next. But I knew this, for the first time since Daniel died. I wasn't walking alone. The cafe just outside the cemetery was quiet that day. One of those small-town spots with fogged windows and the smell of burnt coffee soaked into the walls. I led Benji to a booth near the back where it was warmest. The waitress didn't ask questions. She brought us 2 mugs of tea and a slice of pie without saying a word. Benji held his mug with both hands, letting the heat seep into his fingers. His cheeks were still pale, but some color had returned to them. He looked around like he didn't quite trust it, that something this simple, this safe, could be real. You hungry? I asked. He shook his head. I ate at breakfast. When was that? He thought for a moment. Before I left. It was early. They had oatmeal. I nodded, though the pit in my stomach tightened. His voice was steady, but too careful, like a kid who'd learned not to expect kindness. I can take you back, I said gently, to the home. Let them know you're safe. He flinched. I don't want to go back. I know. I really don't, he said, eyes locked on mine now. It's not just the big kids. The grown-ups there, they don't care. Not really. They just wait for us to age out. I believed him. Every word. And yet, I knew I couldn't just take him home with me. That's not how the world worked. But something inside me whispered, maybe it should. I can't take you home today, I said carefully. But I can visit. I can talk to the staff. Ask if I'm allowed to come by. Maybe bring you here sometimes. Would that be okay? His shoulders sagged with something that looked almost like relief. Yeah, that'd be okay. And if you ever need anything, you can talk to me. I mean it. He nodded, then asked, Are you always this nice? That caught me off guard. I almost laughed. No, I said. Not always. I forgot how to be for a long time. Back at the home, the staff was surprised but not frantic. Apparently, Benji had gone missing before, never for long, never far. Just long enough to make his absence feel like a whisper. The kind no one chases too hard. I asked to speak to his caseworker. She was polite but exhausted, said the right things, promised someone would talk to the older boys, promised they'd look into better supervision. But her eyes had that tired glaze of someone who knew it wouldn't really change. So I asked the question I hadn't planned to ask. What would it take to foster him? She blinked. You. Yes, me. Her expression shifted, part surprise, part suspicion, part something like hope. You'd need a stable income, a safe living space, background checks, interviews, references. I can do that, I said. I hadn't worked in 2 months. My savings were thin. The house was still full of shadows and sorrow. But when I looked at Benji, I didn't see a stranger. I saw a boy sitting at a grave alone in the cold, and I saw myself. Back home that night, I sat in Daniel's room for the first time in days. But this time I didn't talk to him. I listened. To the silence. To the way the air felt different. I looked around the room. At the posters, the trophies, the books still stacked in his nightstand. I imagined another boy sleeping here. Not to replace Daniel. Never that. But to carry something forward. I whispered, I don't know if this is right. I don't know if I can do this. But I think I have to try. The next morning, I called everyone I could think of. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Former coworkers. Even my old supervisor. One of them, Ronald, called back the same afternoon. I heard you're looking for work, he said. We just lost someone in admin. It's part-time to start, but steady hours. Decent pay. I accepted before he finished the sentence. 2 weeks later, I had my paperwork started. I bought new bedding, soft blue sheets, not Daniel's color, something different. I cleaned the room from top to bottom, careful not to erase my son, but ready to make space for someone else. The first weekend Benji came to visit, he stood in the doorway of the room and whispered, "Is this really for me?" "Yes," I said. "It's yours, if you want it." He ran his hand over the desk, looked at the bookshelves, the clean window pane. "I used to have a room," he said, "but it wasn't just mine. I had to share." "You don't have to share this one," I told him. "It's just for you." He smiled then. A small thing, fragile but real. That night, when I checked in on him before bed, he was already asleep, curled up under the new blanket, breathing evenly. And in that moment, something inside me shifted again, not in pain but in peace. Daniel's room wasn't a shrine anymore. It was a beginning. We were 2 months in when everything almost came undone. I had just finished organizing the last of the paperwork for the foster certification. My background check had cleared. The interviews had gone well. My supervisor even gave me a glowing letter of recommendation. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something. Bricks, foundation, walls. Not just surviving, but building. Then the call came. It was from the director of the children's home. Her voice was stiff, like she was bracing herself. "Ms. Carter," she began, "I wanted to inform you before it's official. We've had a development regarding Benji." The air in my kitchen changed. Everything slowed. She continued, "A man has come forward, Mark Taylor. He's Benji's biological uncle, the brother of Benji's late father. He has filed a request to take custody." I don't remember putting down the phone, but I heard the soft click as it landed on the table. Mark Taylor. The name meant something. I had heard it once, years ago. He was Stephen's brother-in-law. We'd met at a cookout maybe a decade ago, before everything went dark. He was quiet, lived in Dayton, didn't keep in touch with family, and apparently now he wanted to raise the boy I was about to call my son. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing. It felt like I was watching someone else's life collapse. Again, later that day, I drove out to the cemetery. Not to grieve, not to cry, just to breathe. I sat on the same bench where I'd first seen Benji, knees pulled close, coat zipped to my chin, eyes on the gray sky. And that's where he found me. I didn't see him approach. I just heard a voice, gentle and unsure. "Excuse me, are you okay?" I turned to look up at the man standing beside me. Mid-40s, tired eyes, familiar jawline. He was holding a bouquet of faded roses. I knew who he was before he said another word. "You're Mark," I said. He blinked. "Yes. Do we?" "We met once," I said. "A long time ago." He nodded, still not quite placing me. "Are you family?" "No," I said. "Not by blood." A pause. Then, "Benji." I looked away. "I didn't expect to find you here," he said. "But I've seen you before. A few times. You come often." "So do you," I replied quietly. We stood in silence for a while. Finally, I said, "He's a good kid." "I know," he said. "I've met him. Only recently. I wanted to come sooner, but life. Divorce. Debt. It took a while to get myself together." I didn't speak. I couldn't. "I heard about you," he added. "He talks about you. A lot." Those words hit harder than I expected. "He was mine," I whispered. "Maybe not legally, but he was mine." Mark nodded slowly. "I believe you." I turned toward him, anger rising. "Then why take him?" Because I'm his only blood relative left, he said softly. Because I finally can. Because I want to do the right thing. What if doing the right thing breaks his heart? He looked pained. And what if it breaks yours? I didn't answer. That night, I sat in Daniel's room. The new room. Benji's room now. His hoodie was draped over the chair. A book half open on the bed. His laughter still lingered faintly in the air. And all I could think was, I can't lose another child. I had barely survived it once. I wouldn't survive it twice. I wanted to fight, to scream, to make threats. But I knew that wouldn't help. The system favored blood ties. Mark had every legal right. I hadn't adopted Benji yet. I wasn't his mother. Not officially. But I loved him. And sometimes, love has to be louder than law. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I didn't answer the phone when the director from the children's home called again. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to hear the final decision, to face what it would mean to say goodbye. Instead, I packed a small bag with Benji's favorite snacks, a new sketch pad, and a pair of gloves I'd just bought for him, soft, wool-lined dark blue. He said blue made him feel brave. I drove to the group home like I had so many times before, but my heart felt like it was cracking with every mile. I didn't know if they would let me see him. I didn't know if Mark had already come to take him. I just knew I had to try. To my surprise, they let me in. Benji was waiting in the hallway, bundled in his coat, his eyes lighting up when he saw me. You came, he beamed. I was hoping you would. I crouched down to hug him. My arms shook. We're going somewhere quiet, I said. Just to talk. We found a small park nearby, the kind with frozen swings and a wooden bench under a leafless tree. Mark was already there, pacing in the cold, his breath fogging in front of him. When Benji saw him, he didn't run. He didn't smile. He just looked confused. You both came, he asked. Together. Mark and I exchanged a glance. Benji, I said gently, we need to talk to you. Am I in trouble? No, sweetie, I said. Not at all. Mark knelt beside him. We want to know what you want. Not the court. Not the papers. Just you. Benji's face changed, like he finally understood something. Then he shook his head, fiercely. I don't want to choose. I don't want to lose either of you. Mark sat back on his heels, looking up at me, his jaw tight. We don't want to lose you either, I said. That's why we're trying to figure out a way to stay in your life. Both of us. Benji sniffed. Can't we just live together? Like a team or something? That word. Team. It echoed in the quiet like something too big to say out loud. Mark ran a hand through his hair. You know, I've been thinking. I don't really have much time me to Dayton anymore. My job's remote now. If I moved here, maybe we could figure something out. I stared at him. You'd really do that? He shrugged. I lost my brother. I'm not going to lose his son too. And I'm not going to rip him away from someone who already loves him like a mother. Benji looked between us. So we'd all be together. Maybe not in the same house, I said, my voice shaking, but in the same town. Same school. Weekends together. Dinners. Birthdays. Real family stuff. And I get to stay in my room? He asked. I smiled through tears. It's still yours. He leaned his head on my shoulder. I like the idea of a team. That night, back in my kitchen, Mark and I made tea and talked like people who were no longer strangers. We hashed out ideas, schedules, plans that didn't make sense on paper but felt right in our hearts. Maybe someday he'd get a place nearby. Maybe we'd rotate holidays. Maybe, just maybe, we'd become the kind of patchwork family you only see in movies. You know, Mark said. Halfway through his second cup of tea, I thought you'd hate me. I did, I said, honest, until you showed up at the grave. He nodded. And now? I'm not sure yet, I replied, but I was smiling. You're not so bad. We both laughed. It was awkward but real. The first real laugh I'd had in years. 2 months later, The court approved the final paperwork. I was officially Benji's foster parent with adoption pending. Mark signed a document too, one that gave him visitation, shared holidays, and the right to be a part of Benji's life. It wasn't traditional, it wasn't clean or simple, but it was ours, and it was working. 2 years later, the house is filled with sounds again: running feet, slamming doors, laughter muffled through walls. Sometimes I still catch myself flinching at the noise, half expecting it to vanish like a dream. But it doesn't. It stays. Benji stays. He is 10 now, taller, louder, full of ideas and opinions and endless questions. He leaves his shoes everywhere. His backpack explodes across the hallway every afternoon. He sings off-key in the shower and tells me knock-knock jokes he doesn't always understand. And every time I look at him, my heart remembers how to beat fully again. We live in a new place now, a bigger house shared with Mark. Not by accident, not as a compromise, but as a choice. A shared choice. Yes, Mark and I eventually got married. It wasn't planned. Nothing about our lives was. But there was something about building a life with someone who had already lost like I had, who knew the shape of grief and didn't try to fix it. He didn't want to erase Daniel. He didn't try to replace him. He just stood beside me and helped carry the weight. And somewhere in the quiet days between therapy appointments, parent-teacher conferences, and dinner-time jokes, love grew. Not the blazing, heady kind I used to believe in, but the steady, healing kind that says, "You're not alone anymore." Benji calls him Uncle Dad. We never asked him to. He just started doing it one day, like it had always been the most natural thing in the world. And he still calls me Mom. It happened on my 45th birthday. I hadn't expected anything. I was folding laundry when he slipped into the room, holding a small envelope in his hands. He was quiet, nervous, his cheeks flushed in a way I hadn't seen since the early days. "This is for you," he said. Inside was a card, a simple one, blue like his gloves. There was a drawing on the front, him, me and Mark standing under a crooked tree. His handwriting was still a little messy, but I could read every word. "Happy birthday, Mom. I love you." Mom. I froze. The world stopped spinning for a second. My throat closed, my hands trembled, and before I could stop them, tears spilled onto the card. He watched me nervously. "Is it okay that I wrapped him in my arms before he could finish. "You can always call me that," I whispered. "You always could." Later that night, after he went to bed, I placed that card on the shelf in my room, right next to an older one. The one I found in Daniel's room years ago. The one that said, "Mom, I love you. Always." 2 cards, 2 boys, 2 truths. One who left me and one who saved me. I sat by the window and looked out over the quiet yard. The moon was high. The trees swayed gently, casting long shadows across the grass. Somewhere down the hall, Mark was putting away dishes. The hum of life continued, normal, soft, imperfect. And I whispered into the dark, "Daniel, we're okay now." I don't believe in ghosts, but I believe in love that doesn't end. I believe in boys who find you at graves and teach you how to live again. I believe in rooms that can hold more than one kind of memory. And I believe that sometimes healing doesn't look like forgetting, it looks like beginning again. This wasn't the life I planned, but it's the one that chose me. And I am so, so grateful.